Biden just minutes away from giving his third State of the Union address and his last before the upcoming general election. Thank you for joining us tonight on this special edition of All Indiana Politics.
We are joined this evening by two members of Indiana's best political team. Former Carmel Democratic City Councilor Miles Nelson, who also made a run for mayor last year. He's here, as you can see. We also are joined by Whitley Yates, the Director of Diversity and Engagement for the Indiana Republican Party.
Good to see you both. Thank you so much for being here. Absolutely. Miles, we'll start with you tonight. What are you expecting and anticipating hearing from the president?
Well, you know, I hope the president just explains why he should have a second term and be the president again. I hope he talks about the economy and talks about how he was able to not have the country go through a recession, but a soft landing. I hope he talks about Ukraine and defending our allies. I hope he also talks about Israel and how he's been able to support their right to defend themselves, but also provide aid to Palestinians and hopefully negotiate a ceasefire soon. So that's what I'm hoping to hear.
And we think he will, of course, talk about the economy and expect us to draw a contrast between Democrats and Republicans on policy issues. And Whitley, I want to ask you, what do you want to see on this front tonight?
I want to see him focus on tangibles that he has delivered for the American people. I don't want to hear him lambast any of his political opponents. I want him to actually focus on how he has delivered and the direction that he will be sending the country in. Because I think when we think about where the country is now, the state of our union, it may not be through the same lens in which he's seeing it. And so I want to hear some accountability and things that we must work on as a nation, areas that we can do better in. And I don't expect, and I don't want to hear the term MAGA Republicans. If you hear that.
Okay, so honestly, I think we all know we're probably going to hear that. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Miles, I'll turn that to you.
Well, unfortunately, it's what we have in our political world right now. It's a reality in this country. And so there are, you know, a lot of moderates. One thing I learned while knocking on doors while I was running for mayor is that we're a bunch of moderates. However, the far right, the far left, they take a lot of the oxygen. And so what I'd like to see is our mayor, our president, who is a moderate, talk about why he should be president again. Maybe not focus on the far right or even the far left, but focus on the rest of us.
Are you thinking he should focus on health care?
I think he should focus on health care. I think he should focus on a woman's right to choose, defend her rights, but also talk about IVF and a variety of other things that affect such a large swath of our population.
What about you?
I think, you know, if we're going to be honest, there are some places and spaces that the president has not been strong on. One of those is border security. So I'm really looking to see how he addresses the border wall, knowing that he repealed back a lot of what Trump was doing in building the wall and the Remain in Mexico policies, and how his policies have kind of, you know, been a little bit pervasive in increasing the amount of people that we have crossing our border. And so I'm interested to see how he's going to talk about that, but also inflation. They're going to tell us it's down, but we all know what we've experienced during this presidency and what the plan is to really combat inflation and the economic crisis that we're currently in. I'm interested to see how he frames the issues that we are helping to aid within Israel, knowing that the progressives within his party are against providing aid and supporting Israel. And so that is going to be a fine line that he's going to have to walk tonight in how he's able to bridge the gap. He spoke about unity when he ran for office and wanting to unite the country. I'm not quite sure that that was an attainable goal, but I'm interested to see how this conversation and this State of the Union speech personifies his last State of the Union speech in this presidency term.
To Miles's point, Whitley, and I'll ask you this. You know, Miles talked about moderates. So who does he has to walk that fine line, because he has to try to win those votes, those moderate voters over, but he also has to win some within his own party as well. So who will he be talking to mostly tonight? His own party, who maybe don't like some of the things he's done, or the moderates who aren't decided as to which way they're going to go?
He's going to have to cultivate a conversation that connects with both audiences. His content of what he says is going to have to bring the moderates along and also quell those who may not feel as though he's progressive enough or that he's left enough. So if he wants this to be successful, he's going to have to be able to bridge that gap and create a message that resonates with both without offending the most.
Is there anything that you think that maybe he should not touch on?
Listen, he's a grown-up.
Right.
And I think his role is to be the leader. And I think people are interested in hearing what he has to say. I think he's been a very steady hand based on the previous president. I think we needed Joe Biden, and I think this country needs another 4 years. You know, what I don't want to see is our country go through what we did in 2016 under President Trump's presidency. That was very stressful for a lot of people, especially women. I think under Biden, listen, he may not be the most exciting individual, but he's exactly what this country needs right now.
What about you, Whitley?
I think he should stay away from taking jabs at his political opponent because it won't fare well. When people are watching tonight, they want to know about the state of the union under his leadership, not anyone else's, and utilizing his political opponent as a fallback plan or utilizing this dais as an opportunity to grandstand against Trump is going to fall flat, because the American people want to know, what have you done since you've been in office in these 4 years for this country, and how is the direction in which you plan to go going to benefit me and my family?
I think that's fair. I think American people are tired of the toxicity. I think they are tired of the name calling. They're tired of the arguments. You know, one of the things that we see is like you're either one party or the other, but we also see people who are engaged in politics and those who aren't. I think what this country wants is just, an opportunity to be able to speak with each other, even with opinions that are different, and still get along. And I think that's what Joe Biden presents.
So you're thinking camaraderie is what we should have?
Civility.
Yep.
Civility is what we're looking for.
Is that doable today, Whitley?
I'm going to be honest.
Go ahead. Let's hear it, because I know you are.
I'm going to be honest. I think he's going to get up there. I think he's going to talk bad about Trump. I think he's going to get booed, and that will then enrage the other side. I think that there are going to be moments where he does get claps from the other side, but I also believe he's going to cut some ribbons that were initiated in the previous administration, or he's going to take credit for some things that Republican lawmakers have done that he wasn't necessarily for, but was able to see go through his administration. And so I don't believe that the Republican side of Congress is going to let him slide. We've seen these go from being a place of civility to almost cackling and hackling in some of the previous State of the Unions that we've witnessed. And so I think that right now people are looking for accountability, and if they don't hear it in that speech, they may call him out. And
So if he doesn't take account for what anything that he's done that has gone right, he should take accountability for that.
Absolutely. Because if he doesn't, the crowd may have a consensus to take accountability or to show him that they're in disagreement with what he's saying.
The Republican side of the crowd.
Yes.
Obviously. And
I think that's unfortunate. I think, you need to respect the position. I agree with Whitley. I think, these have become kind of displays of partisanship. And I think the American people are tired and frustrated and angry. They don't want to see that. It shouldn't just be these far right and left edges that are determining how the rest of us view government. And we need to be a little more, might I say, mature, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's a word.
That is a word.
That's a word that we I think can all use a little bit more of when we're talking about politics. Senator Katie Britt will be delivering the rebuttal tonight. She's a freshman senator. We haven't heard much from her. What are you expecting to hear from her tonight, Whitley?
I always find it very interesting who is selected and chosen for the rebuttals, because it is a platform. And so I think this is an opportunity for her to really garner a nation, to allow for her to have this level of spotlight so soon after she was placed in office is honestly, it's a great respect, but it is a heavy load, because if she says something that's not in alignment with the majority of the Republican Party, then this could be the last time that we hear from her, and her political career could be over.
We've seen it before.
We have.
Yes.
We
It
have.
didn't go well for Marco Rubio.
It did not go well for Marco.
It did not at all. What are you, as we start to see the president shortly making his way into the Capitol here? We'll take you there live once we do see him. Miles, what are you expecting to hear from Senator Britt as well?
Listen, all I can say is that my heart goes out to her because I'm nervous being here. I can only imagine having, tens of millions of people watching. Listen, the far right isn't very sympathetic to missteps.
Right.
And so it'll be interesting to kind of see if there is some sort of hiccup or the messaging isn't right. I hope her speechwriters are on top of their game, because I will feel for her.
And I want to challenge that notion. I don't even think it's just the far right. I don't know if you've seen this video lately of AOC coming from the movies getting heckled by what many would say is the far left. It's really the idea that you can disagree with decorum, and that has been lost. This is an interesting State of the Union because we have a new Speaker of the House.
Right.
His leadership is going to be centrist in how Republicans are reacting to Joe Biden, how they're reacting to what's happening. And so this is really going to also be a testament for him, Speaker Johnson, because how he leads in this moment is going to be integral in how the party is seen and perceived. And so this will be his first time at the State of the Union in the speaker seat. And so I'm interested to see how he leads the party in this time.
Well, we know everything that he's going to speak on, of course, is going to be very important. But is there something, let's ask you in the first, Miles, that you think that he absolutely needs to touch on?
Well, absolutely. I think we need to have some sort of bill from Congress on immigration. I think he needs to demand that. We had an opportunity recently, and it didn't get to him. It died on the vine, as they say. I would also like him to talk about, again, defending a woman's right to choose and their access to IVF. I think, for example, here in Indiana, our neighbors allow that, in our surrounding states. I think nationwide, it is, an overwhelming popular thing. And I think the country deserves to hear that from him.
What about you, Whit?
I definitely agree that immigration will be a topic that we'll see a lot of time spent on. I expect President Biden to blame Republicans for the immigration bill dying that had little to do with immigration and border security. And then I would challenge people watching to say, well, during his first 2 years, he had the House and the Senate. So where were these bills when his party had the majority in the White House? And so, once again, I think this is kind of why people are being fed up with the process, because it's that level of accountability. To know that your party was the dominant party in both houses and you had the White House, why weren't more bills secured for the American people? I think it's easy to point the finger across the aisle, and it's easy to pick up bricks and throw them across the aisle to say this is your fault. But I think together as a nation, we have a problem. And for quite some time during his presidency, he didn't admit that there was a border issue. And I believe he placed it on Vice President Harris's lap for her to initiate and to lead, and I'm not sure if we saw that leadership. And so I believe he had to pick it up. I know that he's going to the border, or has been in the past week or this month. And so I think that it's going to be a very touchy subject, but how the nation is able to come together for immigration reform and national security, which is wrapped into immigration reform, will be a defining moment for decades to come.
Does he touch that, Miles, in your opinion?
I think he better.
Yeah.
I think it's important because the American people want to see a solution. And so, talking about what could have and should have happened in the past, we're beyond that now. Moving forward is what I think the American people are looking for. I think we're tired of the arguing. I think we're tired of accusations. I think what we're looking for are solutions. It's time to come together and work together. And we have an opportunity here. We have a president with the experience. We have a new Speaker of the House that's energetic. Let's get some stuff done.
What do you think will happen if we don't? If he does not address that in his speech?
Well, I think we're seeing it right now. It's more of the same. And I think the American people are exhausted. They're tired. I know young people don't see a bright future. So let's start here. Make tonight the night that we start moving forward.
I don't know if Joe Biden has the energy necessary to propel and meet the moment that America needs. And I think how he performs tonight and how he reads off these cue cards is going to let us know if he's Sleepy Joe or if he's excited and revved up and ready to continue to fight to make America a better place.
So you're saying his energy needs to be like on point there?
It needs to be higher than it's ever been.
Right. Okay.
Well, not that it's ever been, because as a president, because back when he was, he was
Well, yeah, before I was
pretty
born.
energetic. No, it wasn't that long
I
ago. When he was
mean-
vice president, he was pretty energetic.
We didn't see him that much under those aviator lenses.
I don't think that's helpful. I think what we need to do is it's the president of the United States, and there needs to be that type of respect.
Yeah.
And regardless of the party, and I think we just as a country need to start moving forward. I think we're, I'll say it again. I think as a voter,
Right.
I'm tired of it.
No, I agree. And we were actually having this conversation in the newsroom not too long ago as well. The divisiveness is at an all-time high as we take a look at the president making his way into the Capitol. We're just moments away from him taking the podium and delivering his third State of the Union address. Thank you for joining us tonight. To Whitley's point, though, Miles, do you need to see more energy from this president?
He's in his 80s. I don't
Yeah.
frankly see a great deal of energy from the other side either. And these are old men.
Which is a totally different topic that we could probably get into and spend an hour on
As
on
one of them
age, term
myself.
limits and all of that kind of stuff.
But I think the experience is there, and for an 80-year-old man, I think he's got a lot of energy.
Yeah.
That was like one of the questions I was thinking of, because a lot of people that I have spoken with about these certain topics want to say he's an old man and all this, but what does he need to say to prove that I'm not an old man, I know what I'm doing, I'm a hip president, I'm up, I know what needs to be done.
The optics, people can pick and choose and see things in a way and show pictures where his eyes are shut and say that he was asleep, where it just may have been a snapshot. Listen, I'm just watching him right now. I've been watching him on the news, every day for the past couple of years, and he seems fine. He's got energy in the tank. Let the man do his job.
You're confident with his competency level and his cognition?
As a voter, yes, I am.
That was actually my question. Do you think his age is playing a part in
I don't think
anything?
it's age. I think it's competency. I think it's his cognition. It's less about how old he is and more about how he's performing as a leader. When we see him on stage getting confused, walking off, forgetting what he was saying mid-sentence, these are not, in my opinion, these are not the characteristics that I'm looking for someone to lead our nation in this time. I think if we were in a different time, I think if our foreign situation was better than what it is now, I think if the economic stability of America was different, we're watching BRICS build a table without inviting us to sit at it. I think we need someone who's sharper. And if Biden is the sharpest that he's been, and if he's at that level, he's not presenting that way. He's presenting a little disheveled, and so that gives people pause for a cause. And I think when you're looking at some of the polls, specifically from the Democratic side of them saying we're looking for something else and we're not satisfied necessarily with this choice, I don't think it has to do with his policies as much as it has to do with how he's presenting himself to the public.
Miles, do you want to respond to that? Because
I just don't know who we're comparing him to, because the alternative is pretty scary also. What I want to see is the president defend our democracy, protect our poll workers, make sure that our election process is respected. I don't think the alternative does any of that. Everything that Whitley just said, I could say the same thing about the president's opponent. But I'm not here to talk about that individual. What I'm here to talk about is the president of the United States. I think he does have the energy. I just saw Marjorie Taylor Greene in a MAGA hat yelling at the president. Again, I think this country is exhausted. They're tired of seeing that type of rant.
I would agree.
That's not what this country is about. We have much better days ahead of us, and we need to get back to civility.
How does he put a positive spin on the economy, Miles, tonight?
How does he put a positive?
And I know, depending on who you talk to, some economists say it's great, other economists say it's not so great. But so that obviously is going to be a big part of his speech tonight, right? So, what do you want to hear from him that when this is over and we're wrapped up, you can say, oh yeah, you know, the president did a really good job at selling the economy to the American people.
Listen, for a living, I do executive search.
Yeah.
I know that unemployment is still at historical lows. Manufacturing is coming back to the United States. How do I know that? Because that's my focus, that's my niche in the world, making sure that manufacturing companies have the talent that they need. I think he just needs to talk about what he's been able to do. Though the stock market isn't indicative of the economy, it's doing really well. And it was only 4 years ago that then president would talk about the success of the stock market. I think that for many Americans, not all Americans, the economy is robust and doing well. We're seeing startups at a record pace. We're seeing new job creation at a solid click. These are the types of successes. But we are a large country, and we know that the economy is doing well for some, but not all. We need to take care of those where it isn't maybe as successful.
To that group in the not all category.
Yeah.
They're going to say, well, my food prices are up, my interest rates are up, the credit card debt is at an all-time high. Does he touch those topics during this conversation?
Listen, I'm not an economist,
Yeah.
so I don't know why those things are still so high. I know that inflation has been coming down.
Yeah.
It's not coming down quickly enough, even for my household. We're sensitive to that as well. But he's the president. He does need to address these types of things and talk about it. And, you know, show his empathy, which is one of the things that the president does very well. Showing the empathy, relating to individuals, and saying, listen, things are going well, but they're not good enough for everyone. I will be focused for the next 4 years on those people.
And as far as like the border crisis goes, Whitley, what do you think he needs to address as far as that realm?
I think he needs to have a plan, a strategic plan to repair what is happening at the border, to secure more border agents and support them, and to reduce the amount of people who are coming into this country illegally, specifically the ones that are bringing drugs and committing crimes. And I haven't seen it yet, and that's something that I need to see. The nation needs to see it, and we need to hear what that plan is. And I also need to hear how he plans to work with people that don't agree with his ideologies, his leadership, or believe in his administration. Because when you're president of the United States and you have to work with Congress, who may not be lock and step, who may not even like you at all, personally, politically, or professionally, you have to be able to build common ground with uncommon people. And I want to see that he's able to do that, specifically in this moment. When it comes to the economy, I think we would be foolish to not discuss inflation. He's going to tell us it's down, but we all know that it's been at a 40-year high, and it may be down now, but if I experience 3 years of inflation being 40% higher than it's been in 40 years, then it's going to impact me. And what I want to hear as a millennial, when it's hard for us to get homes, interest rates are the highest they've ever been, I want to hear a plan for bringing that back.
Yeah, well, we will see if he brings these topics up. Panel, good to see you. I know you're going to be sitting with us throughout his speech. We will be listening and talk to you afterwards as well. Thank you so much for being here. And for now, we will send you to the United States Capitol, where the President of the United States will deliver the State of the Union. Enjoy.
Thank you. Here's the drill. Good evening. Good evening. If I were smart, I'd go home now. Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, members of Congress, my fellow Americans, in January 1941, Franklin Roosevelt came to this chamber to speak to the nation, and he said, "I address you at a moment unprecedented in the history of the Union. Hitler was on the march. War was raging in Europe. President Roosevelt's purpose was to wake up Congress and alert the American people that this was no ordinary time. Freedom and democracy were under assault in the world. Tonight, I come to this same chamber to address the nation. Now, it's we who face an unprecedented moment in the history of the Union. And yes, my purpose tonight is to wake up the Congress and alert the American people that this is no ordinary moment either. Not since President Lincoln and the Civil War have freedom and democracy been under assault at home as they are today. What makes our moment rare is that freedom and democracy are under attack both at home and overseas at the very same time. Overseas, Putin of Russia is on the march, invading Ukraine and sowing chaos throughout Europe and beyond. If anybody in this room thinks Putin will stop at Ukraine, I assure you he will not. But Ukraine can stop Putin. Ukraine can stop Putin if we stand with Ukraine and provide the weapons that needs to defend itself. That is all. That is all Ukraine is asking. They're not asking for American soldiers. In fact, there are no American soldiers in the war in Ukraine, and I'm determined to keep it that way. But now, assistance to Ukraine is being blocked by those who want to walk away from our world leadership. It wasn't long ago when a Republican president named Ronald Reagan thundered, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Now my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." That's a quote. A former president actually said that, bowing down to a Russian leader. I think it's outrageous, it's dangerous, and it's unacceptable. America is a founding member of NATO, the military alliance of democratic nations created after World War II to prevent war and keep the peace. And today, we've made NATO stronger than ever. We welcomed Finland to the alliance last year. And just this morning, Sweden officially joined, and their minister is here tonight. Come here, stand up. Welcome. welcome, welcome, welcome. And they know how to fight. Mr. Prime Minister, welcome to NATO, the strongest military alliance the world has ever seen. I say this to Congress, we have to stand up to Putin. Send me a bipartisan national security bill. History is literally watching. History is watching. If the United States walks away, it will put Ukraine at risk. Europe is at risk. The free world will be at risk, emboldening others to do what they wish to do us harm. My message to President Putin, who I've known for a long time, is simple. We will not walk away. We will not bow down. I will not bow down. In a literal sense, history is watching. History is watching. Just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Many of you were here on that darkest of days. We all saw with our own eyes the insurrectionists were not patriots. They'd come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people. January 6th lies about the 2020 election and the plots to steal the election posed a gravest threat to U.S. democracy since the Civil War. But they failed. America stood. America stood strong, and democracy prevailed. We must be honest. The threat to democracy must be defended. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th. I will not do that. This is the moment to speak the truth and to bury the lies. Here's the simple truth. You can't love your country only when you win. Ever since being elected to office, I ask all of you without regard to party to join together and defend democracy. Remember your oath of office to defend against all threats, foreign and domestic. Respect free and fair elections, restore trust in our institutions, and make clear political violence has absolutely no place in America, zero place. Again, it's not hyperbole to suggest history is watching. We're watching. Your children and grandchildren will read about this day and what we do. History is watching another assault on freedom. Joining us tonight is Latoya Beasley, a social worker from Birmingham, Alabama. 14 months ago, she and her husband welcomed a baby girl thanks to the miracle of IVF. She scheduled treatments to have that second child, but the Alabama Supreme Court shut down IVF treatments across the state, unleashed by a Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. She was told her dream would have to wait. What her family had got through should never have happened. Unless Congress acts, it could happen again. So tonight, let's stand up for families like hers. To my friends across the aisle, don't keep this waiting any longer. Guarantee the right to AVF. Guarantee it nationwide. Like most Americans, I believe Roe v. Wade got it right. I thank Vice President Harris for being an incredible leader, defending reproductive freedom, and so much more. Thank you. My predecessor came to office determined to see Roe v. Wade overturned. He's the reason it was overturned, and he brags about it. Look at the chaos that has resulted. Joining us tonight is Kate Cox, the wife and mother from Dallas. She's become pregnant again and had a fetus of a fatal condition. Her doctor told Kate that her own life and her ability to have children in the future were at risk if she didn't act. Because Texas law banned her ability to act, Kate and her husband had to leave the state to get what she needed. What her family got through should have never happened as well, but it's happening in too many others. There are state laws banning the freedom to choose, criminalizing doctors, forcing survivors of rape and incest to leave their states to get the treatment they need. Many of you in this chamber and my predecessor are promising to pass a national ban on reproductive freedom. My God, what freedom else would you take away? Look, it's a decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court majority wrote the following, and with all due respect, justices, women are not without electoral power. Electoral or political power. You're about to realize just how much you're right about that. Clearly, those bragging about overturning Roe v. Wade have no clue about the power of women. But they found out when reproductive freedom was on the ballot. We won in 2022 and 2020, and we'll win again in 2024. If you, the American people, send me a Congress that supports the right to choose, I promise you, I'll restore Roe v. Wade as the law of the land again. Folks, America cannot go back. I'm here tonight to show what I believe is the way forward, because I know how far we come. 4 years ago next week, before I came to office, the country was hit by the worst pandemic and the worst economic crisis in a century. Remember the fear, record losses. Remember the spikes in crime and the murder rate, raging virus that took more than 1 million American lives, of loved ones, millions left behind. A mental health crisis of isolation and loneliness. A president, my predecessor, failed the most basic presidential duty that he owes to American people, the duty to care. I think that's unforgivable. I came to office determined to get us through one of the toughest periods in the nation's history. We have. It doesn't make news in 1,000 cities and towns. The American people are writing the greatest comeback story never told. So let's tell the story here. Tell it here and now. America's comeback is building the future of American possibilities, building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down, investing in all America, in all Americans, to make sure everyone has a fair shot, and we leave no one behind. The pandemic no longer controls our lives. The vaccines that saved us from COVID are now being used to beat cancer, turning setback into comeback. That's what America does. That's what America does. Folks, my inherited economy is on the brink. Now our economy is literally the envy of the world. 15 million new jobs in just 3 years, a record, a record. Unemployment at 50-year lows. A record 16 million Americans are starting small businesses, and each one is a literal act of hope. With historic job growth and small business growth for Black and Hispanics and Asian Americans, 800,000 new manufacturing jobs in America and counting. Where is the rich said we can't be the manufacturing capital of the world. We are, and we will. More people have health insurance today. More people have health insurance today than ever before. The racial wealth gap is as small as it's been in 20 years. Wages keep going up. Inflation keeps coming down. Inflation has dropped from 9% to 3%, the lowest in the world, and tending lower. The landing is and will be soft. And now, instead of importing foreign products and exporting American jobs, we're exporting American products and creating American jobs right here in America, where they belong. And it takes time, but the American people are beginning to feel it. Consumer studies show consumer confidence is soaring. Buy America has been the law of the land since the 1930s. Past administrations, including my predecessor, including some Democrats as well in the past, failed to buy American. Not anymore. On my watch, federal projects that you fund, like helping build American roads, bridges, and highways, will be made with American products and built by American workers. Creating good-paying American jobs. And thanks to our CHIPS and Science Act, the United States is investing more in research and development than ever before. During the pandemic, a shortage of semiconductors, chips, that drove up the price of everything from cell phones to automobiles. And by the way, we invented those chips right here in America. Well, instead of having to import them, private companies are now investing billions of dollars to build new chip factories here in America, creating tens of thousands of jobs. Many of those jobs paying $100,000 a year and don't require a college degree. In fact, my policies have attracted $650 billion in private sector investment in clean energy, advanced manufacturing, creating tens of thousands of jobs here in America. And thanks to our bipartisan infrastructure law, 46,000 new projects have been announced all across your communities. And by the way, I noticed some of you strongly voted against it, or they're cheering on that money coming in. I like it. I'm with you. I'm with you. If any of you don't want that money in your district, just let me know. Modernizing our roads and bridges, ports and airports, public transit systems. Removing poisonous lead pipes so every child can drink clean water without risk of brain damage. Providing affordable high-speed internet for every American, no matter where you live, urban, suburban, or rural communities, in red states and blue states. Record investments in tribal communities. Because of my investment in the family farm, because I invested in family farms led by my Secretary of Agriculture, who knows more about this than anybody I know, we're better able to stay in the family for those farms and their children and grandchildren won't have to leave home to make a living. It's transformative. The great comeback story is Belvidere, Illinois, home to an auto plant for nearly 60 years. Before I came to office, the plant was on its way to shutting down. Thousands of workers feared for their livelihoods. Hope was fading. Then I was elected to office, and we raised the Belvidere repeatedly with auto companies, knowing unions would make all the difference. The UAW worked like hell to keep the plant open and get these jobs back, and together we succeeded. Instead of auto factories shutting down, auto factories reopening, and new state-of-the-art battery factories being built to power those cars there at the same. The folks at Belvidere, I say, instead of your town being left behind, your community is moving forward again. Because instead of watching auto jobs of the future go overseas, 4,000 union jobs with higher wages are building the future in Belvedere right here in America. Here tonight is UAW President Shawn Fain, a great friend and a great labor leader. Shawn, where are you? Stand up. And Dawn Sims, a third-generation worker, UAW worker at Belvedere. Shawn, I was proud to be the first president to stand on the picket line, and today, Dawn has a good job in her hometown, providing stability for her family and pride and dignity as well. Showing once again, Wall Street didn't build America. They're not bad guys. They didn't build it, though. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. I say to the American people, when America gets knocked down, we get back up. We keep going. That's America. That's you, the American people. It's because of you America's coming back. It's because of you our future is brighter. It's because of you that tonight we can proudly say the state of our union is strong and getting stronger. Tonight, I want to talk about the future of possibilities that we can build together. A future where the days of trickle-down economics are over and the wealthy and the biggest corporations no longer get all the tax breaks. And by the way, I understand corporations. I come from a state that has more corporations invested than every one of your states in the United States combined. And I represented it for 36 years. I'm not anti-corporation, but I grew up in a home where trickle-down economics didn't put much on my dad's kitchen table. That's why I determined to turn things around so middle class does well. When they do well, the poor go way up and the wealthy still do very well. We all do well. And there's more to do to make sure you're feeling the benefits of all we're doing. Americans pay more for prescription drugs than anywhere in the world. It's wrong, and I'm ending it. With a law that I proposed and signed, not one of you Republican buddies voted for it, we finally beat Big Pharma. Instead of paying $400 a month or thereabouts for insulin with diabetes, and it only costs $10 to make, they only get paid $35 a month now and still make a healthy profit. And I want to, but what to do next? I want to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for every American who needs it. Everyone. For years, people have talked about it, but finally we got it done and gave Medicare the power to negotiate lower prices on prescription drugs, just like the VA is able to do for veterans. That's not just saving seniors money, it's saving taxpayers money. We cut the federal deficit by $160 billion. Because Medicare will no longer have to pay those exorbitant prices to Big Pharma. This year, Medicare is negotiating lower prices for some of the costliest drugs on the market to treat everything from heart disease to arthritis. It's now time to go further and give Medicare the power to negotiate lower prices for 500 different drugs over the next decade. They're making a lot of money, guys. And they'll still be extremely profitable. will not only save lives, it will save taxpayers another $200 billion. Starting next year, the same law caps total prescription drug costs for seniors on Medicare at $2,000 a year, even for expensive cancer drugs that cost $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. Now I want to cap prescription drug costs at $2,000 a year for everyone. Folks, I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but if you want to get in Air Force One and fly to Toronto, Berlin, Moscow, well, even Moscow, probably. And bring your prescription with you, and I promise you I'll get it for you for 40% the cost you're paying now. Same company, same drug, same place. Folks, the Affordable Care Act, the old Obamacare, it's still a very big deal. Over 100 million of you can no longer be denied health insurance because of pre-existing condition. But my predecessor and many in this chamber want to take this prescription drug away by repealing the Affordable Care Act. I'm not going to let that happen. We stopped you 50 times before, and we'll stop you again. In fact, I'm not only protecting it, I'm expanding it. The enacted tax credits of $800 per person per year reduce health care costs for millions of working families. That tax credit expires next year. I want to make that savings permanent. To state the obvious, women are more than half our population, but research on women's health has always been underfunded. That's why we're launching the first ever White House initiative on women's health research, led by Jill, doing an incredible job as First Lady. So pass my plan for $12 billion to transfer women's health research and benefit millions of lives all across America. I know the cost of housing is so important to you. If inflation keeps coming down, mortgage rates will come down as well, and the Fed acknowledges that. But I'm not waiting. I want to provide an annual tax credit that will give Americans $400 a month for the next 2 years as mortgage rates come down, to put toward their mortgages when they buy their first home or trade up for a little more space. Just for 2 years. And my administration is also eliminating title insurance on federally backed mortgages. When you refinance your home, you can save $1,000 or more as a consequence. For millions of renters, we're cracking down on big landlords who use antitrust law, who break antitrust laws by price fixing and driving up rents. We've cut red tape so builders can get federally financing, which is already helping build a record 1.7 million new housing units nationwide. Now pass and build and renovate 2 million affordable homes and bring those rents down. To remain the strongest economy in the world, we need to have the best education system in the world. And I suspect all of you, want to give every child, a good start by providing access to preschool for 3 and 4 years old. You know, I think I pointed out last year, that children coming from broken homes where there's no books, they're not read to, not spoken to very often, start school, kindergarten, or first grade, having heard 1 million fewer words spoken. Well, studies show that children who go to preschool are nearly 50% more likely to finish high school, go on to earn a 2- and 4-year degree, no matter what their background is. I met a year and a half ago with the leaders of the Business Roundtable. They were mad that they were angry. I think, well, they were discussing why I wanted to spend money on education. I pointed out to them as vice president, I met with over I think it was 182 of those folks. Don't hold me to the exact number. And I asked them what they need most, the CEOs. And you've had the same experience on both sides of the aisle. They say a better educated workforce, right? So I looked at them and I say, I come from Delaware. DuPont used to be the 8th largest corporation in the world. And every new enterprise they bought, they educated the workforce to that enterprise. But none of you do that anymore. Why are you angry with me providing you the opportunity for the best educated workforce in the world? And they all looked at me and said, I think you're right. I want to expand high-quality tutoring and summer learning to see that every child learns to read by 3rd grade. I'm also connecting local businesses and high schools so students get hands-on experience and a path to a good-paying job whether or not they go to college. And I want to make sure the college is more affordable. Let's continue increasing the Pell Grants to working and middle-class families and increase record investments in HBCUs and minority-serving institutions, including Hispanic institutions. When I was told I couldn't universally just change the way in which we dealt with student loans, I fixed 2 student loan programs that already existed to reduce the burden of student debt for nearly 4 million Americans, including nurses, firefighters, and others in public service. Like Keenan Jones, a public educator from Minnesota, who's here with us tonight. Keenan, where are you? Keenan, thank you. He's educated hundreds of students so they can go to college. Now he's able to help, after debt forgiveness, get his own daughter to college. And folks, look, such relief is good for the economy because folks are now able to buy a home, start a business, start a family. While we're at it, I want to give public school teachers a raise. And by the way, the first couple of years, we cut the deficit. Now, let me speak to the question of fundamental fairness for all Americans. I've been delivering real results in fiscally responsible ways. We've already cut the federal deficit. We've already cut the federal deficit over $1 trillion. I signed the bipartisan deal to cut another $1 trillion in the next decade. It's my goal to cut the federal deficit another $3 trillion by making big corporations and the very wealthy finally beginning to pay their fair share. Look, I'm a capitalist. If you want to make or can make $1 million or millions of bucks, that's great. Just pay your fair share in taxes. A fair tax code is how we invest things to make this country great. Healthcare, education, defense, and so much more. But here's the deal. The last administration enacted a $2 trillion tax cut, overwhelmingly benefit the top 1%, the very wealthy and the biggest corporations, and exploded the federal deficit. They added more to the national debt than any presidential term in American history. Check the numbers. Folks at home, does anybody really think the tax code is fair? Do you really think the wealthy and big corporations need another $2 trillion tax break? I sure don't. I'm going to keep fighting like hell to make it fair. Under my plan, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in federal taxes. Nobody, not one penny. And they haven't yet. In fact, the child tax credit I passed during the pandemic cut taxes for millions of working families and cut child poverty in half. Restore that child tax credit. No child should go hungry in this country. The way to make the tax code fair is to make big corporations, the very wealthy, begin to pay their fair share. Remember, in 2020, 55 of the biggest companies in America made $40 billion and paid zero in federal income tax. Zero. Not anymore. Thanks to the law I wrote and we signed, big companies have to pay a minimum of 15%. But that's still less than working people pay in federal taxes. It's time to raise corporate minimum tax to at least 21%. So every big corporation finally begins to pay their fair share. I also want to end tax breaks for big pharma, big oil, private jets, massive executive pay when it's only supposed to be $1 million that can be deducted. They can pay them $20 million if they want, but deduct $1 million. End it now. You know, there are 1,000 billionaires in America. You know what the average federal tax is for those billionaires? No. They're making great sacrifices, 8.2%. That's far less than the vast majority of Americans pay. No billionaire should pay a lower federal tax rate than a teacher, a sanitation worker, or a nurse. I propose a minimum tax for billionaires of 25%, just 25%. You know what that would raise? That would raise $500 billion over the next 10 years. And imagine what that could do for America. Imagine a future with affordable child care. Millions of families can get they need to go to work to help grow the economy. Imagine a future with paid leave, because no one should have to choose between working and taking care of their sick family member. Imagine the future of home care and elder care, and people living with disabilities, so they can stay in their homes and family caregivers can finally get the pay they deserve. Tonight, let's all agree once again to stand up for seniors. Many of my friends on the other side of the aisle want to put Social Security on the chopping block. If anyone here tries to cut Social Security or Medicare or raise the retirement age, I will stop you. The working people who built this country pay more into Social Security than millionaires and billionaires do. It's not fair. We have two ways to go. Republicans can cut Social Security and give more tax breaks to the wealthy. That's the proposal. Oh no, you guys don't want another $2 trillion tax cut? I kind of thought that's what your plan was. Well, that's good to hear. You're not going to cut another $2 trillion for the super wealthy. That's good to hear. I'll protect and strengthen Social Security and make the wealthy pay their fair share. Look, too many corporations raise prices to pad their profits, charging more and more for less and less. That's why we're cracking down on corporations that engage in price gouging and deceptive pricing, from food to health care to housing. In fact, the snack companies think you won't notice if they change the size of the bag and put a hell of a lot fewer, same size bag, put fewer chips in it. No, I'm not joking. It's called shrinkflation. Pass Bobby Casey's bill and stop this. I probably all saw that commercial on Snickers bars. You get charged the same amount, and you got about, I don't know, 10% fewer Snickers in it. Look, I'm also getting rid of junk fees. Those hidden fees at the end of your bill that are there without your knowledge. My administration announced we're cutting credit card late fees from $32 to $8. Banks and credit card companies are allowed to charge what it costs them to instigate the collection. And that's more a hell of a lot like $8 and 30-some dollars. They don't like it. The credit card companies don't like it. But I'm saving American families $20 billion a year with all the junk fees I'm eliminating. Folks at home, that's why the banks are so mad. It's $20 billion in profit. I'm not stopping there. My administration has proposed rules to make cable, travel, utilities, and online ticket sellers tell you the total price up front so there are no surprises. It matters. It matters. And so does this. In November, my team began serious negotiation with a bipartisan group of senators. The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen. Oh, you don't think so? Oh, you don't like that bill, huh? That conservatives got together and said it was a good bill? I'll be darned. That's amazing. That bipartisan bill would hire 1,500 more security agents and officers, 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backload of 2 million cases, 4,300 more asylum officers, and new policies so they can resolve cases in 6 months instead of 6 years now. What are you against? More high-tech drug detection machines to significantly increase the ability to screen and stop vehicles smuggling fentanyl into America. That's killing thousands of children. This bill would save lives and bring order to the border. It would also give me and any new president new emergency authority to temporarily shut down the border when the number of migrants at the border is overwhelming. The Border Patrol Union has endorsed this bill. The Federal Chamber of Commerce is, yeah. You're saying low. Look at the facts. I know you know how to read. I believe that given the opportunity for a majority in the House and Senate would endorse the bill as well, a majority right now. But unfortunately, politics has derailed this bill so far. I'm told my predecessor called members of Congress in the Senate to demand they block the bill. He feels political win. He viewed it as will be a political win for me and a political loser for him. It's not about him. It's not about me. I'd be a winner. Not really. Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of thousands of people being killed by illegals? To her parents, I say, my heart goes out to you, having lost children myself. I understand. But look, if we change the dynamic at the border, people pay these smugglers $8,000 to get across the border because they know if they get by and let into the country, it's 6 to 8 years before they have a hearing. And it's worth taking the chance of the $8,000. But if it's only 6 weeks, the idea is it's highly unlikely that people will pay that money and come all that way knowing that they'll be able to be kicked out quickly. Folks, I would respectfully suggest my Republican friends owe it to the American people, get this bill done. We need to act now. And if my predecessor is watching, instead of paying politics and pressuring members of Congress to block the bill, join me in telling the Congress to pass it. We can do it together. But that's what here's what he will not do. I will not demonize immigrants saying they are poison in the blood of our country. I will not separate families. I will not ban people because of their faith. Unlike my predecessor on my first day in office, I introduced a comprehensive bill to fix our immigration system. Take a look at it. It has all these and more. Secure the border. Provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, and so much more. But unlike my predecessor, I know who we are as Americans. We're the only nation in the world with a heart and soul that draws from old and new. Home to Native Americans, whose ancestors have been here for thousands of years. Home to people of from every place on earth. They came freely. Some came in chains. Some came when famine struck, like my ancestral family in Ireland. Some to flee persecution, to chase dreams that are impossible anywhere but here in America. That's America. And we all come from somewhere, but we're all Americans. Look, folks, we have a simple choice. We can fight about fixing the border, or we can fix it. I'm ready to fix it. Send me the border bill now. A transformational moment in history happened 59 years ago today in Selma, Alabama. Hundreds of foot soldiers for justice marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, named after the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, to claim their fundamental right to vote. They were beaten, they were bloody, and left for dead. Our late friend and former colleague, John Lewis, was on that march. We miss him. Joining us tonight are other marchers, both in the gallery and on the floor, including Betty Mae Fikes, known as the voice of Selma. The daughter of gospel singers and preachers, she sang songs of prayer and protest on that bloody Sunday to help shake the nation's conscience. 5 months later, the Voting Rights Act passed and was signed into law. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But 59 years later, their forces taking us back in time. Voter suppression, election subversion, unlimited dark money, extreme gerrymandering. John Lewis was a great friend to many of us here. But if you truly want to honor him and all the heroes who marched with him, then it's time to do more than talk. Pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And stop denying another core value of America, our diversity across American life. Banning books, it's wrong. Instead of erasing history, let's make history. I want to protect fundamental rights. Pass the Equality Act. And my message to transgender Americans, I have your back. Pass the PRO Act for workers' rights. Raise the federal minimum wage, because every worker has a right to a decent living, more than $7 an hour. We're also making history by confronting the climate crisis, not denying it. I don't think any of you think there's no longer a climate crisis. At least I hope you don't. I'm taking the most significant action ever on climate in the history of the world. I'm cutting our carbon emissions in half by 2030, creating tens of thousands of clean energy jobs, like the IBEW work is building and installing 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. Conserving 30% of America's lands and waters by 2030. And taking action on environmental justice, fence line communities smothered by the legacy of pollution. And pattern after the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps, I launched the Climate Corps to put 20,000 young people to work in the forefront of our clean energy future. I'll triple that number in a decade. To state the obvious, all Americans deserve the freedom to be safe. And America is safer today than when I took office. The year before I took office, murder rates went up 30%. 30% they went up. The biggest increase in history. It was then, through my American Rescue Plan, which every American voted against, I might add, we made the largest investment in public safety ever. Last year, the murder rate saw the sharpest decrease in history. Violent crime fell to one of its lowest levels in more than 50 years. But we have more to do. We have to help cities invest in more community police officers, more mental health workers, more community violence intervention. Give communities the tool to crack down on gun crime, retail crime, and carjacking. Keep building trust, as I've been doing by taking executive action on police reform and calling for it to be the law of the land. Directing my cabinet to review the federal classification of marijuana and expunging thousands of convictions for the mere possession, because no one should be jailed for simply using or have it on their record. Take on crimes of domestic violence. I'm ramping up the federal enforcement of the Violence Against Women Act that I proudly wrote when I was a senator, so we can finally end the scourge against women in America. There are other kinds of violence I want to stop. With us tonight is Jasmine, whose 9-year-old sister Jackie was murdered with 21 classmates and teachers in elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. Very soon after that happened, Jill and I went to Uvalde for a couple of days. We spent hours and hours with each of the families. We heard their message, so everyone in this room, in this chamber, could hear the same message. The constant refrain, and I was there for hours meeting with every family. They said, do something. Do something. Well, I did do something by establishing the first ever Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the White House, that the Vice President is leading the charge. Thank you for doing it. Meanwhile, my predecessor told the NRA he's proud he did nothing on guns when he was president. Oh. After another shooting in Iowa recently, he said, when asked what to do about it, he said, just get over it. There's his quote, just get over it. I say, stop it. Stop it, stop it, stop it. I'm proud we beat the NRA when I signed the most significant gun safety law in nearly 30 years because of this Congress. We now must beat the NRA again. I'm demanding a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Pass universal background checks. None of this. I taught the Second Amendment for 12 years. None of this violates the Second Amendment or vilifies responsible gun owners. You know, as we manage challenges at home, we're also managing crises abroad, including in the Middle East. I know the last 5 months have been gut-wrenching for so many people, for the Israeli people, for the Palestinian people, and so many here in America. This crisis began on October 7th with a massacre by a terrorist group called Hamas, as you all know. 1,200 innocent people, women and girls, men and boys, slaughtered after enduring sexual violence. The deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and 250 hostages taken. Here in this chamber tonight are families whose loved ones are still being held by Hamas. I pledge to all the families that we will not rest until we bring every one of your loved ones home. We also work around the clock to bring home Evan and Paul, Americans being unjustly detained by the Russians and others around the world. Israel has the right to go after Hamas. Hamas ended this conflict by releasing hostages, laying down arms, could end it by releasing the hostages, laying down arms, and surrendering those responsible for October 7th. But Israel has Israel has an added burden because Hamas hides and operates among the civilian population like cowards under hospitals, daycare centers, and all the like. Israel also has a fundamental responsibility, though, to protect innocent civilians in Gaza. This war has taken a greater toll on innocent civilians than all previous wars in Gaza combined. More than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed, most of whom are not Hamas. Thousands and thousands of innocents, women and children, girls and boys, also orphaned. Nearly 2 million more Palestinians under bombardment or displacement. Homes destroyed, neighborhoods in rubble, cities in ruin. Families without food, water, medicine. It's heartbreaking. I've been working nonstop to establish an immediate ceasefire that would last for 6 weeks to get all the prisoners released, all the hostages released, to get the hostages home and ease the intolerable and humanitarian crisis and build toward an enduring, something more enduring. The United States has been leading international efforts to get more humanitarian assistance to Gaza. Tonight, I'm directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters. No U.S. boots will be on the ground. A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day. And Israel must do its part. Israel must allow more aid into Gaza to ensure humanitarian workers aren't caught in the crossfire. And they're announcing they're going to have a crossing in northern Gaza. To the leadership of Israel, I say this: humanitarian assistance cannot be a secondary consideration or a bargaining chip. Protecting and saving innocent lives has to be a priority. As we look to the future, the only real solution to the situation is a two-state solution over time. And I say this as a lifelong supporter of Israel. My entire career, no one has a stronger record with Israel than I do. I challenge any of you here. I'm the only American president to visit Israel in wartime. But there is no other path that guarantees Israel's security and democracy. There is no other path that guarantees Palestinians can live in peace with peace and dignity. And there's no other path that guarantees peace between Israel and all of its neighbors, including Saudi Arabia, with whom I'm talking. Creating stability in the Middle East also means containing the threat posed by Iran. That's why I built a coalition of more than a dozen countries to defend international shipping and freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. I've ordered strikes to degrade the Houthi capability and defend U.S. forces in the region. As Commander-in-Chief, I will not hesitate to direct further measures to protect our people and our military personnel. For years, I've heard many of my Republican and Democratic friends say that China is on the rise and America's falling behind. They've got it backwards. I've been saying it for over 4 years, even when I wasn't president. America's rising. We have the best economy in the world. And since I've come to office, our GDP is up, our trade deficit with China is down to the lowest point in over a decade. And we're standing up against China's unfair economic practices. We're standing up for peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. I've revitalized our partnership and alliance in the Pacific. India, Australia, Japan, South Korea, the Pacific Islands. I've made sure that the most advanced American technologies can't be used in China, not allowing to trade them there. Frankly, for all this tough talk on China, it never occurred to my predecessor to do any of that. I want competition with China, not conflict. And we're in a stronger position to win the conflict of the 21st century against China than anyone else, for that matter, than any time as well. Here at home, I've signed over 400 bipartisan bills. But there's more to pass my unity agenda. Strengthen penalties on fentanyl trafficking. You don't want to do that, huh? Pass bipartisan privacy legislation to protect our children online. Harness the promise of AI to protect us from peril. Ban AI voice impersonations and more. And keep our truly sacred obligation to train and equip those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they come home and when they don't. That's why the song Support and Help of Dennis and the VA, I signed the PACT Act. One of the most significant laws ever, helping millions of veterans exposed to toxins who now are battling more than 100 different cancers. Many of them don't come home, but we owe them and their families support. We owe it to ourselves to keep supporting our new health research agency called ARPA-H. And remind us that we can do big things, like end cancer as we know it, and we will. Let me close with this. Yay. I know you don't want to hear any more, Lindsay, but I got to say a few more things. I know it may not look like it, but I've been around a while. When you get to be my age, certain things become clearer than ever. I know the American story. Again and again, I've seen the contest between competing forces in the battle for the soul of our nation. Between those who want to pull America back to the past and those who want to move America into the future. My lifetime has taught me to embrace freedom and democracy, a future based on core values that have defined America: honesty, decency, dignity, equality, to respect everyone, to give everyone a fair shot, to give hate no safe harbor. Now, other people my age see it differently. The American story of resentment, revenge, and retribution, that's not me. I was born in mid-World War II when America stood for the freedom of the world. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claymont, Delaware, among working-class people who built this country. I watched in horror as two of my heroes, like many of you did, Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy, were assassinated. And their legacies inspired me to pursue a career in service. I left the law firm, became a public defender because my city of Wilmington was the only city in America occupied by the National Guard after Dr. King was assassinated because of the riots. And I became a county councilman almost by accident. I got elected to the United States Senate when I had no intention of running at age 29. Then vice president of our first black president. Now president to the first women vice president. In my career, I've been told I was too young. By the way, they didn't let me on the Senate elevators for votes sometimes. They're not a joke. And I've been told I'm too old. Whether young or old, I've always known what endures. I've known our North Star. The very idea of America is that we're all created equal and deserves to be treated equally throughout our lives. We've never fully lived up to that idea, but we've never walked away from it either. And I won't walk away from it now. I'm optimistic. I really am. I'm optimistic, Nancy. My fellow Americans, the issue facing our nation isn't how old we are, it's how old are our ideas. Hate, anger, revenge, retribution are the oldest of ideas. But you can't lead America with ancient ideas that only take us back. You lead America, the land of possibilities. You need a vision for the future and what can and should be done. Tonight you've heard mine. I see a future where defending democracy, you don't diminish it. I see a future where we restore the right to choose and protect our freedoms, not take them away. I see a future where the middle class finally has a fair shot and the wealthy have to pay their fair share in taxes. I see a future where we save the planet from the climate crisis and our country from gun violence. Above all, I see a future for all Americans. I see a country for all Americans. And I will always be president for all Americans because I believe in America. I believe in you, the American people. You're the reason we've never been more optimistic about our future than I am now. So let's build the future together. Let's remember who we are. We are the United States of America. And there is nothing beyond our capacity when we act together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, you have been watching the State of the Union address. We want to remind you that we will bring you the Republican response from Alabama Senator Katie Britt in just a few minutes, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, until we get to that, we want to bring back in our political analyst tonight, Miles Nelson, Whitley Yates. We talked a lot before the speech, and we kind of thought we'd be bringing up a lot of these topics. What was your response? We'll start with you tonight, Miles. Your thoughts on what he had to say.
Well, I thought he had a lot of energy. We were all kind of talking about that. What would the president bring tonight? I thought he was hopeful. He was optimistic. He had a positive message. He talked about a future of possibilities. He talked about focusing on the middle class. This made me feel great. Great as a voter, great as an American.
Whitley?
He did talk about a lot of possibilities, but not a lot about what he's actually produced for the American people. He started with Ukraine and talking about weapons, and he's not sending soldiers. And that was one of the first times that he got booed for the night. He talked about NATO being stronger. But we all know where we are when it comes to BRICS versus NATO. And so we know that other nations are building tables and creating alliances that we're not involved in, and they happen to be the nations producing the most oil. He brought up Putin and having to stand up to Putin, which I don't think any of us are willing to deny, but then segues from Putin to January 6th. So there were a lot of moments where I thought he had an opportunity to provide and produce what he has done for the American people, but I got a lot of platitudes. But I will say he did have more energy.
I was going to ask you, yeah.
I will say he had more energy. I do think he took a couple of naps before he did this speech, and he was energized enough to complete it in a way that made us feel like he is still at least in the race.
Well, I liked what he said about the economy. As a business person, as a father, as a husband, as a, family, I thought it was important that he focused on the economy. He talked about how unemployment is at a 50-year low. He talked about 60 million new small businesses, 800,000 manufacturing jobs. These are all things that are going to strengthen that middle class that really is the heartbeat of our country's economy and our country.
You heard him say that unions built the middle class. Did that stick out to you?
Absolutely, yes. And he's always been a defender of the unions. He talked about the UAW. He talked about their victories over the last couple of years. No, this was a very hopeful thing. And one of my favorite lines was when he said, "When America gets knocked down, we get back up. The future is bright." Again, he is the leader in chief. He is, the president. It's his messaging. It's what he is able to deliver in terms of giving us all hope that is going to continue to make everybody feel a little bit better. Listen, we've been knocked down. This has been a lot tough, with COVID and a lot of these things that we've had to live through. We have struggled as a country. We have struggled as a people. Mm-hmm. And, hopefully, we've matured. We can move forward. I think the Americans want us to move forward.
And Whitley, what did you think about him saying that women are not without political power? Did that stick out to you at all?
No, I mean, it didn't resonate with me, I will say that. I think that he has to make a nod to Women's History Month because that's the month that we're in.
So you think that's why he said that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I watched him tap dance around a lot of these different areas. He went from climate change to BLM to LGBTQ into Palestine. I mean, he definitely hit on a lot of these social issues that are on the minds of the progressives. It's interesting when we talk about strengthening the middle class, when we talk about the UAW. I'm someone who's, I'm a UAW girl. My family, father, grandfather, all were UAW members in Kokomo at the plant. So you want to support and defend the UAW, but then you put restrictions and policies in place that force them to make electric cars when people barely have money to pay the car notes that they have now. It's one thing to talk about what you want to do, but then when you look at how the policies that he's predicated over his 4-year term have impacted the auto industry itself, even with inflation. He said, we're at a record low inflation, but it's a record low from being an all-time high for 40 years. We have to put things in perspective, and I'm not quite sure that the perspective was given. I do appreciate the Women's Health Initiative that he mentioned, about having the Women's Health Initiative, but then there were other things that he mentioned with such vigor that I was confused about. I wish he cared and attacked the border the way that he's going to attack Ticketmaster. I mean, I'm not quite sure if that's what's at top of mind for Americans. He talked about taxing the rich, he talked about taxing businesses, but his own son is currently engulfed in a tax issue where he wasn't even paying tax. I mean, it's just a lot of the ideas and things that he wants to see. It's hard for us to see them in play when it's definitely not in his family and when he hasn't produced anything toward that in these 4 years.
What did you think about him saying that he would not demonize immigrants?
I don't think that anyone should be demonized, but I think that if you're coming in this country and you are committing crimes and you're killing people and you're beating police officers and you're smuggling drugs, then it's not us that's demonizing you, it's the decorum and the behavior in which you're bestowing. And so I think that we have to be careful in basically saying that you're not going to characterize a group of people. It's not about who they are, but it's about the actions and what's happening. So no, not all people coming here and crossing the border illegally are perpetuating crimes, but there are some that are, and the ones that are should face consequences. And those consequences don't look like getting their rent paid, getting free food, free meals, and getting any type of sanctuary or amnesty in any of our cities.
Miles, I want you to respond to that, but I also want to ask you about that moderate base that we talked about, the folks who maybe are uncertain as to who they're going to vote for come November.
Right.
Did he do enough to win those folks over?
I absolutely think he did. I think the president did a great job. He talked about things that were important to a lot of middle-class people, a lot of hardworking Americans, a lot of moderates. Talked about, getting rid of lead pipes so that children can drink clean drinking water. He talked about giving rural areas and more people high-speed internet. He talked about investing in family farms. That, to me, is talking to the people who are actually going to be going to the polls, not the loudmouths on either side. In terms of that inflation, I think what he was talking about was it had come down from 9% to 3%, which is actually the lowest inflation rate in the entire world right now. I don't think he had mentioned that it's a record rate. I'm sure inflation has been lower over time. He talked about, consumer confidence and making sure that we buy America, refocusing us, making sure that we are focusing on what is important, making sure that we're buying American products to keep our factories in business, focusing on infrastructure, making sure that there's an investment, because as business owners, as people, as communities, we all benefit from a strong, reliable infrastructure. And I think the president came through with that tonight.
I'm confused, though, because he did talk about manufacturing and he did talk about increasing business and making sure that we're purchasing in America. At the same time, he said he wanted to tax those corporations that were going to be here at a higher rate. Now, while he did flub on his numbers and have a Biden gaffe, he wants to increase corporate tax. And the truth is, America can't tax its way into prosperity at the same time competing with other countries, specifically in the manufacturing field. And so I think, once again, idea versus execution. He's saying he wants these corporations to come. He's saying he wants to build business here in America. At the same time, he's saying he's going to create a culture and an environment where businesses would be better to go elsewhere, where they can have lower taxes and be able to produce products and have a larger return on their investment.
I think I'm not going to speak for the president, but Whitley, I think what we can all agree is that the United States companies are taxed at a lower rate than most any other company in any other country around the world. Mm-hmm. I just think what companies are going to be asked to do is pay their fair share, just like the billionaires. Billionaires and corporations shouldn't be paying less than what hardworking Americans are paying. And so as a business owner, yes, I expect to pay taxes. As a citizen of the United States, taking advantage of all the wonderful things that we have, yes, we should be paying our fair share.
I got to ask you, what did each of you think about when he said, you can't love your country only when you win?
Oh, that was strong. That was strong. And he was obviously making a message to his predecessor, right, who didn't necessarily defend our democracy or respect and defend our election process. That's what he was talking to. I don't think it was hard to figure out what he was talking about.
Whitley, I gotta ask.
I mean, I think we all know exactly what he was talking about, and I just hope he keeps that same sentiment in November, because if he does lose the election, as I'm predicting that he will, I want to see how that same message resonates. I think it's really interesting when we talk about losing elections and we talk about election deniers. more specifically in talking about Trump, no one has ever called other people, specifically Democrats who've lost elections, who said that there was tampering, mishandling, and things of that nature. Hillary Clinton is one of those people. Stacey Abrams, who said that she didn't lose to Brian Kemp. Those people are never mentioned. So it could be that he meant that for his predecessor, or maybe for members of his own party who have denied election results as well.
Maybe, Whitley, I don't know.
It applies to both.
Are you concerned that maybe that this speech did resonate with the middle?
No.
With the undecided voter?
So I think it resonated with moderate Democrats. I don't believe it resonated with moderate conservative Republicans because he took so many jabs. Although he may not have said former President Trump or said Trump's name, he kept saying, my predecessor, my predecessor. And when he talked specifically about things the Democrats were doing, it was a we. And then when he talked about things that were being held up by Republicans, it was a you. Then at the end of his speech, he talked about restoring the soul of the nation and civility, while he clearly had a very decisive speech. And it was also clear within the chamber, there were times that Republicans were jeering and upset, but also there were times that they were shouting 4 more years, 4 more years. So it was like, are we watching the State of the Union, or is this the Super Bowl? We're cheering for our teams.
Right.
And it felt very polarized, almost tribalist, if you will. And I think that that is a top-down culture.
Right.
Yeah, it resonated with me because I have a nephew who's 18 years old. This is his first year voting. Do you think that President Biden resonated with the younger voters?
You know, listen, that's tough. They tend to show up in smaller numbers than, let's say, older Americans, senior citizens, our seniors. But we'll see. You know, there's a lot of time between now and the actual election in November. There's going to be a lot of field work going to be done, and get out to vote is going to be as important in this election as it always is. Young people will need to be energized, and there's going to have to be messaging that communicates with them. I think young people want to feel hopeful that their futures will be as bright as their parents and their grandparents. I know young people want to be assured by all of us that the decisions we make towards the environment will be, you know, better for that will be taking care of the environment, so that whatever we leave them to inherit will be something worth inheriting. I think the president did a good job of saying, listen, I'm going to be investing in new electric vehicles and in technology. There's going to be oodles of jobs for everybody. I think that was a very positive message. I think that will resonate with young people.
What about you, Whitney?
No, I don't think his message was geared towards young people. I don't think the content of the conversation that we heard tonight was for the youth, definitely not Gen Z. If it was, I would have heard more about mental health. I would have heard more about making it affordable to own your own home. These are things I believe that Gen Z are looking for, creating a climate where their businesses can thrive and them not be taxed at absorbent rates. I think the youngest thing about Biden tonight was probably his veneers. But in keeping it with the State of the Union, I would say that towards the end of his speech, he made an effort to speak to progressives. He made an effort to talk and distinguish between Hamas and the Palestinians. And he did say the word ceasefire. I don't know if anybody was listening, but he did say those words to signal to, I would say, a younger audience, a younger Democratic progressive audience, that he hears them. But overall, I don't think that the messages resonate. Maybe the Ticketmaster fees could be something that the younger voter is interested in.
Your thoughts on the ceasefire, Miles?
On the ceasefire?
Yeah.
Well, I think the United States has shown that they respect Israel's right to defend itself. I know that as a country, we're grappling with the response that Israel has. The United States has been airdropping supplies that are much needed. There needs to be discussions on and a ceasefire. Listen, it's a complicated issue. Clearly, there's still a long way to go.
Are you concerned that that's going to hurt him with progressives?
Listen, it's certainly going to hurt.
Not the ceasefire, I mean
Right.
the way that we've handled it, the way that he's handled it so far.
You know, it is as I always explain, being Jewish,
Yeah.
I grapple with this. I understand that the president is doing whatever he can to have a ceasefire, to respect Israel's right to defend itself, but also worry about many innocents, women and children, Palestinians, being killed. It's a complicated issue, one that I wish, like so many Americans, would cease.
Yeah. So we're, of course, waiting to hear the response from Alabama Senator Katie Britt right now. What does she have? This is a tough spot to be in. We were talking about this prior to the State of the Union. Tough spot. Freshman senator. He obviously gave a pretty good speech by all indications. He was energetic. I think if you press people, probably would say this was his best State of the Union so far out of the previous three. So what do we need to hear from her?
I think she's going to talk about what wasn't said. I think she's going to talk about how inflation has ran rampant through our country and the effects of that. I think she's going to talk about fentanyl flooding our borders and the casualties that that drug has had. I think she's going to discuss our foreign relations and foreign affairs in a way that we didn't really hear it tonight. We heard about the conflicts that we're involved in, but we didn't necessarily hear about a plan to address. Besides, you guys think China's taken over. Well, they're not. America is. That's not a plan. That's a quip, right? And so I think what she's going to do is paint a different picture for the State of the Union, and I'm interested to see in which one resonates with America more. So if you watch this State of the Union and you felt hope and prosperity for what he was saying, is that what you feel in your everyday life? When you are walking about at the gas station, when you're at the store, when you are looking at where you are in life, do you feel as prosperous as Joe Biden must have felt at the dais tonight, remembering the words that he said?
Is there anything he could have said that good tonight that you think would have been good tonight?
I think if he would have been accountable for some of the missteps, that would have been better. I think if he would have been honest, and I'll be honest, he didn't really talk a whole lot about technology outside of taking credit for the CHIPS and Science Act, which was, a Republican-led initiative by Senator Todd Young. He didn't talk a lot about cybersecurity. He didn't talk a lot about making sure technologically our data is safe and that these hacks that are happening aren't going to continue to happen because we're investing in all of these different things that would prevent that. He talked about chips, but didn't talk about data security, data trust, and data privacy, which I think Gen Z is at the front of. And so I think just having a moment of humility to say, listen, I know how people feel America is doing. By the numbers, this is how we're doing, but I know you may feel differently, and let me assure you that X, Y, and Z. But he's not necessarily that type of leader. He's going to rest on the data, and say, well, inflation is down. If inflation was up and the price of groceries are up and it goes down, but the price of groceries remain the same, it still feels the same for us. It's still the same. And so we are battling with that, right now. And so I think just an honest take on what we are feeling. Now, we don't have as much money as him.
We're going to go live now to the Republican response. Here's Senator Katie Britt.
The future of children in every corner of our nation. And that's why I invited you into our home tonight. Like so many families across America, my husband Wesley and I just watched President Biden's State of the Union address from our living room. And what we saw was the performance of a permanent politician who has actually been in office for longer than I've been alive. One thing was quite clear, though. President Biden just doesn't get it. He's out of touch. Under his administration, families are worse off, our communities are less safe, and our country is less secure. I just wish he understood what real families are facing around kitchen tables just like this one. You know, this is where our family has tough conversations. It's where we make hard decisions. It's where we share the good, the bad, and the ugly of our days. It's where we laugh together, and it's where we hold each other's hands and pray for God's guidance. And many nights, to be honest, it's where Wesley and I worry. I know we're not alone. And so tonight, the American family needs to have a tough conversation, because the truth is, we're all worried about the future of our nation. The country we know and love seems to be slipping away, and it feels like the next generation will have fewer opportunities and less freedoms than we did. I worry my own children may not even get a shot at living their American dreams. My American dream allowed me, the daughter of 2 small business owners from rural Enterprise, Alabama, to be elected to the United States Senate at the age of 40. Growing up, sweeping the floor at my dad's hardware store and cleaning the bathroom at my mom's dance studio, I never could have imagined what my story would entail. To think about what the American dream can do across just one generation, in just one lifetime, it's truly breathtaking. But right now, the American dream has turned into a nightmare for so many families. The true, unvarnished state of our union begins and ends with this. Our families are hurting. Our country can do better. And you don't have to look any further than the crisis at our southern border to see it. President Biden inherited the most secure border of all time. But minutes after taking office, he suspended all deportations, he halted construction of the border wall, and he announced a plan to give amnesty to millions. We know that President Biden didn't just create this border crisis, he invited it with 94 executive actions in his first 100 days. When I took office, I took a different approach. I traveled to the Del Rio sector of Texas. That's where I spoke to a woman who shared her story with me. She had been sex trafficked by the cartels starting at the age of 12. She told me not just that she was raped every day, but how many times a day she was raped. The cartels put her on a mattress in a shoebox of a room, and they sent men through that door over and over again for hours and hours on end. We wouldn't be okay with this happening in a third world country. This is the United States of America, and it is past time, in my opinion, that we start acting like it. President Biden's border policies are a disgrace. This crisis is despicable. And the truth is, it is almost entirely preventable. From fentanyl poisonings to horrific murders, there are empty chairs tonight at kitchen tables just like this one because of President Biden's senseless border policies. Just think about Laken Riley. In my neighboring state of Georgia, this beautiful 22-year-old nursing student went out on a jog one morning, but she never got the opportunity to return home. She was brutally murdered by one of the millions of illegal border crossers President Biden chose to release into our homeland. Y'all, as a mom, I can't quit thinking about this. I mean, this could have been my daughter. This could have been yours. And tonight, President Biden finally said her name. But he refused to take responsibility for his own actions. Mr. President, enough is enough. Innocent Americans are dying, and you only have yourself to blame. Fulfill your oath of office. Reverse your policies, end this crisis, and stop the suffering. Sadly, we know that President Biden's failures don't stop there. His reckless spending dug our economy into a hole and sent the cost of living through the roof. We have the worst inflation in 40 years and the highest credit card debt in our nation's history. Let that sink in. Hardworking families are struggling to make ends meet today. And with soaring mortgage rates and sky-high childcare costs, they're also struggling to how to plan for tomorrow. The American people are scraping by, while President Biden proudly proclaims that Bidenomics is working. Goodness, y'all, bless his heart, we know better. I'll never forget stopping at a gas station in Chilton County one evening. The gentleman working the counter told me that after retiring, he had to pick up a job in his 70s so that he didn't have to choose between going hungry or going without his medication. He said, I did everything right. I did everything I was told to do. I worked hard, I saved, I was responsible. He's not alone. I hear similar concerns from fellow parents, whether I am walking with my friends or whether I'm at my kids' games. But let's be honest, it's been a minute since Joe Biden pumped gas, ran a carpool, or even pushed a grocery cart. Meanwhile, the rest of us see our dollar and we know it doesn't go as far. We see it every day. And despite what he tells you, our communities are not safer. For years, the left has coddled criminals and defunded the police, all while letting repeat offenders walk free. The result is tragic, but foreseeable. From our small towns to America's most iconic city streets, life is getting more and more dangerous. And unfortunately, President Biden's weakness isn't just hurting families here at home. He is making us a punchline on the world stage. Look, where I'm from, your word is your bond. But for 3 years, the president has demonstrated that America's word doesn't mean what it used to. From abandoning our allies in his disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan to desperately pushing another dangerous deal with Iran, President Biden has failed. We've become a nation in retreat, and the enemies of freedom, they see an opportunity. Putin's brutal aggression in Europe has put our allies on the brink. Iran's terrorist proxies have slaughtered Israeli, Jews, and American citizens. They've targeted commercial shipping, and they've attacked our troops nearly 200 times since October, killing 3 U.S. soldiers and 2 Navy SEALs. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party is undercutting America's workers. China is buying up our farmland, spying on our military installations, and spreading propaganda through the likes of TikTok. You see, the CCP knows that if it conquers the minds of our next generation, it conquers America. And what does President Biden do? Well, he bans TikTok for government employees, but creates an account for his own campaign. Y'all, you can't make this stuff up. Look, we all recall when presidents faced national security threats with strength and resolve. That seems like ancient history. Right now, our commander-in-chief is not in command. The free world deserves better than a dithering and diminished leader. America deserves leaders who recognize that secure borders, stable prices, safe streets, and a strong defense are actually the cornerstones of a great nation. Just ask yourself, are you better off now than you were 3 years ago? There's no doubt we're at a crossroads, and it doesn't have to be this way. We all feel it. But here's the good news. We, the people, are still in the driver's seat. We get to decide whether our future will grow brighter or whether we'll settle for an America in decline. Well, I know which choice our children deserve, and I know the choice the Republican Party is fighting for. We are the party of hard-working parents and families, and we want to give you and your children the opportunities to thrive. And we want families to grow. It's why we strongly support continued nationwide access to in vitro fertilization. We want to help loving moms and dads bring precious life into this world. Wesley and I believe there is no greater blessing in life than our children. And that's why tonight, I want to make a direct appeal to the parents out there, and in particular to my fellow moms, many of whom I know will be up tossing and turning at 2 a.m., wondering how you're going to be in 3 places at once and then somehow still get dinner on the table. First of all, we see you, we hear you, and we stand with you. I know you're frustrated. I know you're probably disgusted by most of what you see going on in Washington, and I'll be really honest with you, you're not wrong for feeling that way. Look, I get it. The task in front of us isn't an easy one, but I can promise you one thing. It is worth it. So I am asking you, for the sake of your kids and your grandkids, get into the arena. Every generation has been called to do hard things. American greatness rests in the fact that we always answer that call. It's who we are. Never forget, we are steeped in the blood of patriots who overthrew the most powerful empire in the world. We walk in the footsteps of pioneers who tamed the wild. We now carry forward the same flame of freedom as the liberators of an oppressed Europe. We continue to draw courage from those who bent the moral arc of the universe. And when we gaze upon the heavens, never forget that our DNA contains the same ingenuity that put man on the moon. America has been tested before, and every single time we've emerged unbowed and unbroken. Our history has been written with the grit of men and women who got knocked down. But we know their stories because they did not stay down. We are here because they stood back up. So now it's our turn, our moment to stand up and prove ourselves worthy of protecting the American dream. Together, we can reawaken the heroic spirit of a great nation. Because America, we don't just have a rendezvous with destiny. We take destiny's hand and we lead it. Our future starts around kitchen tables just like this, with moms and dads just like you. And you are why I believe with every fiber of my being that despite the current state of our union, our best days are still ahead. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless these United States of America.
All right, well, you just heard from Alabama Senator Katie Britt with the Republican response to Biden's State of the Union address.
Yes, want to get your reaction. We'll start with you, Whitley. Your thoughts?
You know, I thought she definitely put on a performance for us, but she hit on all the points that I believed Biden needed to hit on. She definitely put some extra sauce on it and in it, but talked about being out of touch, less safe, less secure, worried about our future. That's what most people are feeling. I think she could have said that without all that pizzazz,
Yeah.
but we get what she was saying.
A little overly dramatic.
It was a little dramatic,
Yes.
a little SNL-y.
We know we will hear about it on SNL, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Miles, your thoughts?
Well, I felt like I was watching a telenovela, and I thought it was sappy. I thought she started off with fear. Didn't leave me hopeful at all. I thought it wasn't as professional as I think it could have been. What I did not hear was anything about women's reproductive rights, anything about IVF. I didn't hear about anything about passing immigration solutions from Congress. I didn't hear anything about the environment. I didn't hear anything about
It's not her speech.
making billionaires pay for their taxes.
She's not president, so she just has to respond to what he said.
Thank you very much, but I still didn't hear any of it. And I didn't hear anything about affordable health care, and I certainly didn't hear anything about defending our democracy, which as an elected official, it was in I was expecting that. Respecting our elections, respecting, if you lose. I didn't hear anything about that. I didn't hear anything about anything.
Yeah.
I heard her kind of placating to all of us, pandering. That's what I heard.
You said telenovela.
Telenovela.
Final word, Whitley, before we say goodnight.
I think that right now we have a lot of performances happening, but I think we need to focus on what people are producing. As we head into November, actually as we head into May in the primary in whatever state you're in, if you're in Indiana, it needs to be what are people going to produce? And I'm not talking about with their words, it's their policies that we need to look forward and toward.
Okay. Whitley Yates, Miles Nelson, good to see you both. Thank you for being here on a very busy night. Thank
Very
you so
busy.
much.
Well, that's all the time we have for this special edition of All Indiana Politics, the State of the Union.